So, Nouriel Roubini testified before the Senate this week and made some pretty wild accusations against cryptocurrency, against blockchain, against Bitcoin, against ICOs. And in fact, a lot of what he said isn't invalid. There are some decent points that he made, but there are some glaring oversights and some glaring inaccuracies that I think need to be addressed, and I'm happy, as Mr. Crypto Vape, to address them. He seems to like arguing with people who are crypto fanatics and don't want to consider that there may be some downsides to any of this. But it would be nice for him to actually listen to a more reasoned and justified debunking of some of the myths that I think he has been perpetuating, or at least some of the things that he seems to have gotten himself confused about. So the three main there's a couple of main things he honed in on. One was centralization. Roubini argues that cryptocurrencies, especially proof-of-work currencies, are centralized to the extent that mining of them, that proof-of-work is centralized. Proof-of-work is centralized because a few very large companies do most of the mining. Now, this is not. This is true. And that he also has a problem with where a lot of that is done: China, Belarus, Russia. He's obviously excludes Canada from that list, which is, somewhat of a problem because a lot of mining does get done in Canada. One of the other problems is that his grief with cryptocurrency or proof-of-work cryptocurrencies is the centralization of mining, then it doesn't seem to me to be I don't see how that's an inferior situation. It's not ideal, and it's not the way people wanted it to be. That's how it's become. Who knows what the future holds? The point is, though, that it doesn't make Bitcoin any more centralized than any other fiat currency with which it's competing with. If we're talking about Bitcoin competing against fiat as a currency, then it is no more or less centralized than the US dollar, for example. There's only one miner of the US dollar, in fact. So on the centralization issue, I think he is criticizing the evolution of the industry behind the technology rather than the technology itself. And I think that's a distinction that needs to be made. That his criticism is in fact a faux criticism. It's a criticism of the human propensity to this is what happens in industry. This is what's always happened. The big companies get bigger and more powerful, and they start to dominate and behave like monopolies. He's criticizing capitalism. He's not criticizing Bitcoin, and I think that that's something that so I just don't think it's a criticism of Bitcoin itself or a proof of work itself. He also talks about the fact that we have banking systems, our deposits are protected by being insured by governments. There's a lot of inefficiencies in our banking systems, and he does recognize that. But more importantly, there's a hell of a lot of unbanked people in the world, and that is something that that's a positive that cryptocurrency can change. It can change it pretty quickly and pretty easily. I'll give you an example. There are 200 banks in Indonesia, yet 93% of the population of Indonesia, one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population, don't have a bank account, don't use banks. So what cryptocurrency can do is bank the unbanked. And we know the inefficiencies that are involved in people being unbanked, and we know the efficiencies and the growth that the global economy can achieve if we are able to bank the billions of people who are unbanked. Now, I walk into a bank with $20 and I want to open a bank account. Then they tell me to go away because the compliance costs and all that stuff. I'm not worth it to them. I'm not worth having them go to the trouble of opening an account for me. So I don't know what the numbers are, but it's got to be into the billions. It's got to be the majority of the population right now in the world don't have a bank account. Cryptocurrency can change all that entirely. And let's talk about the effect cryptocurrency could have on internet. And, the whole idea of Bitcoin becoming the money of the internet. Yeah. I, with a Canadian credit card, can try and book a plane ticket, and as long as I'm outside of Canada, that transaction is going to be blocked randomly, without any reason, about 1 in every 7 transactions I try and make. That's a matter of policy of either Visa or the bank or both together, and that's because of how rampant online credit card fraud is. I know people whose credit cards get defrauded before they even arrive in the mail, before they've been activated. Someone's got their credit card number. So these centralized credit card banking systems that we have right now are prone to incredible levels of fraud and security problems, and that causes an inconvenience to users like me trying to book a plane ticket outside of my own country. So the good doctor is, one of the premises is Bitcoin, because there's a degree of anonymity that cryptos provide that other payment forms don't, and therefore it's prone to fraud and theft. I don't think entirely stacks up when we know how big of a problem credit card fraud and theft is. He talks about the great revolutions in fintech. He's talking about PayPal, Venmo, stuff like that. But these are the revolutions in fintech. They have nothing to do with blockchain, nothing to do with cryptocurrency. Let me tell you, as you all know, PayPal is neither cheap nor quick. It still takes a number of days for a PayPal transaction to clear. And PayPal, because they're evil, take a massive chunk of it's fairly convenient, but it's not instant, right? Cryptocurrencies are theoretically and potentially instant. Are they at the moment? No. But what is that a criticism of? Is it a criticism of the cryptocurrency itself, or is it a criticism of the infrastructure that surrounds it? Is it a criticism of the POS systems that don't yet support it? And why is that the case? Are Visa and MasterCard standing in the way? Is something else going on? Or is it just not there yet? Frustrates me no end that he's talking about how inefficient it might be to walk into a cafe and you want to buy a cup of coffee, and The vendor's got to list the prices in 300-400 different currencies rather than one, because I could have Bitcoin, I could have Bitcoin Cash, I could have Ripple, I could have Ether, I could have Stellar Lumas, and they don't know what the hell's going on. It's not going to work out like that. What's going to happen is the cafe is going to list coffee in their fiat value, and they'll have a POS system installed so that I can pay with whatever currency I have, whether that's their fiat, my fiat, another fiat, any number of cryptos that will instantly convert into the fiat, the currency of the vendor's choice. This is the technology that's coming, and the good Dr. Roubini somehow doesn't sort of see coming. So what we have then are Visa speed. There are cryptocurrencies that do compete with Visa. He talk about the how many transactions per second Bitcoin can do, it being between 5 and 7. That we already know that Ripple, that Stellar, that that Nano can basically transact instantaneously and either incredibly cheaply or free. In the case of Nano, this is a transaction cost issue. I don't know if Nouriel Roubini has ever been to Thailand, but if he had, he'd know that he gets to the airport in Bangkok, and he gets his debit card, or he's got some cash with him, say he's got some US cash with him, and he goes to the exchange booth and he exchanges it for Thai baht because he's got to get a taxi from the airport, and the dude isn't going to accept US dollars. He's going to want Thai baht. So Nouriel's going to go to the exchange RS booth and be shafted with an outrageous exchange rate. But what choice has he got? He criticizes the idea of monopolistic and oligopolistic behavior. There's a monopoly for you. The exchange booth at a damned airport, right? Because they know they got an audience there of people who have no other choice but to use their overpriced services. So he gets his taxi, he gets his Thai baht at a terrible exchange. He's lost 7% of his money. He takes a taxi ride, and it's cost him 7% more than otherwise it would have had we had a more universal way to pay. And then he needs some more cash after a couple of days in Bangkok because he's been drinking a bit or whatever. He's gone shopping, and he goes to an ATM. The Thai bank's ATM is going to whack him a good $6 or $7 for the privilege of using it. He's got a debit card, right? He's got his US bank debit card. So it's going to cost him $6 or $7 for the right to use that ATM. His bank at home is similarly going to charge him $6 or $7 for the privilege of using his card, accessing his own money outside of his country or outside of his banking network even. In addition to that, his bank is going to give him the worst exchange rate that they can muster. And speaking in my experience, you try and get $500-$600 worth of money out of a bank machine in Thailand, it costs $50 with the there's also, so you get charged by the bank in Thailand, you get charged a fee by your own bank, you get terrible exchange rates, and you get an exchange rate conversion fee, and that's bigger than any of them. So you lose again around 10-12% of your money. What cryptocurrency does is reduces transaction costs. I sent Bitcoin from one wallet to another the other day. It cost 5 cents. Took 20 minutes. Now, if that's not better than any other technology that we've got for moving money around the world right now, I don't know what is. So I think while he made a number of good points, while he's a smart guy, he's missed a lot of obvious use cases and obvious scenarios in which currencies that run on blockchains work a lot better than anything we've got right now. I think it's his talk of bubbles and stuff is part of his brand. I don't take it too seriously. Bitcoin, all cryptos have been price volatile. They're not in widespread use. Yeah. I just think I don't take that too seriously because I see it as, he likes talking about bubbles. He's the bubble man. Mr. Bubble. Mr. Bubble Roubini. So I'm here to talk about bubbles, man. Dr. Roubini, what do you think about this? I think it's a bubble. Dr. Roubini, what do you think about that? It's a fucking bubble, man. This is the other thing I want to talk about, the Gini coefficient. And this is where I think he's being insincere, actually. Because I respect that some of his opinions have merit, yeah? But the Gini coefficient, comparing the Bitcoin Gini coefficient to that of North Korea, I would put it to him that if tomorrow Bitcoin became accepted everywhere, well, let's imagine someone invented a POS system and infrastructure, shipped it out to every retailer, every merchant in the world, and Bitcoin was what you would what everyone could spend, was what everyone used to buy stuff. That Gini coefficient of Bitcoin would improve massively. The Gini coefficient is there to measure how well a society is doing in spreading out its wealth. I don't think you can talk about the Gini coefficient of. There's a great article in Bits Online, which is the Gini coefficient of tuberculosis is 1. There's 10 million people in the world who have it, and everybody else doesn't. Is that an argument for trying to eradicate tuberculosis? No. Should we try to eradicate tuberculosis? Absolutely. But that, not because it's not because it's inequitably distributed. This is about nascency of the industry and nascency of the technology, and the fact that it hasn't yet gotten the widespread use that, hopefully one day it will. We go back to the simple white paper, peer-to-peer transfer of funds without a trusted intermediary. So my bank doesn't get to tell me that I'm not allowed to buy a plane ticket because I'm not trying to make the transaction from inside of Canada or whatever jurisdiction it decides is okay for me to make a transaction inside of. I don't pay their fees. It's near enough to free. Near enough to free to be, transaction costs are very minimal. And look, what banks make in fees and transaction costs is a massive tax on everybody. And then you got the added bonus of suddenly being able to bank the however many billion people in the world are currently unbanked. So I think there's massive efficiencies that can be gained from the wider spread adoption of cryptocurrency. I don't think we're going to necessitate merchants to list prices in 200 different currencies. I don't think it's ever going to get to that point. I think we'll have technology that instantaneously converts any given currency into any given other currency. Just like I can buy I can buy a beret on Amazon from Brazil, priced in Brazilian real, with with my Russian ruble based credit card, and the currency gets converted. We can do currency conversions, right? So I think it's worth having bears. I think any industry should have its bears, and I think any industry should have dissenting voices. And I think that a lot of his criticisms are entirely valid. The number of, the amount of, the presence of scams in the ICO space, for example, is a problem. It's a recognized problem. Everybody knows about it. It doesn't speak to the central technology at heart, though. What it does is speak to human propensity to try and steal from each other, basically. Centralization. I mean, if Bitcoin's centralized, if Bitcoin mining is centralized, as it is, what about banking in the US? I mean, pick your evils, sort of thing. Which one? If the criticism of Bitcoin is that the mining of it is excessively centralized, and thus there's too much control in too few hands, and then let's talk about the banking industry in the US and probably any given country. Most national banking systems are monopolized or heavily concentrated. So I think that Dr. Roubini is kind of, I don't know that a good amount of his, not many of his arguments are actually arguments against the technology of cryptocurrency itself, and that's the central problem I have with his fundamental position, is that his arguments, he's got a great argument against fraud. Sure, fraud's wrong, I agree with you, great. Scams are wrong, Ponzi schemes are wrong, monopolization is wrong. All these things are wrong. But none of that speaks to the technology behind blockchain and cryptocurrency. It speaks to the implementation of it, and the fact that there's bad actors around. I mean, it's not like crime never happened before crypto did. So that's my take from Crypto Vape on the Roubini testimony, and his concurrent is his outrageous tweets after it. Check it out. Click on a couple of links below if you want to, have a look at some of our views. And feel free to argue with me. I like a good argument, but just don't be a dickhead. I have a no dickhead policy. You know what I mean? Trolling and things that don't make sense. That's fine, but this is not for me.